the use twice over of the root favor in the translation of this passage is deliberate, because it is the root that we find coming in the difficult Greek itself, coming from the difficult Hebrew. We have this word which has come through to us as our Ave Maria Gratia Plena, coming from the fact that we can't say in Latin graced, because that's actually the Greek. Chere, rejoice, and they've got it here, rejoice as such, even though the Hebrew used by the angel would probably have been shalom, peace. That was the natural way of greeting somebody. And it comes through in Latin as ave, which means, well, hail is the equivalent, actually. It's a good translation. And the second part is actually a past participle of to grace. Charis is grace, and therefore the angel, as we have it in the Greek anyway, is saying, rejoice, graced one, in the feminine. And then we find in the same passage the word coming through again, because they've translated it in the modern here, English, as rejoice, so highly favoured one, because grace is favour, pleasingness, delight, and so on. And then we have it coming through again as you have found favour. Again, deliberate, because the root is there twice over in the Greek. It's making a point. And translation is a difficult operation, as is exegesis, the pulling out of the meaning. And the meaning was difficult to understand. Indeed, great giants wrestled over it. The likes of Thomas Aquinas, it was not clear what was going on with regard to the fullness of grace of the Blessed Virgin. The problem was this: she's on our side of the frontier between God and man. She is human, and the teaching is that Christ is the Redeemer of all mankind. Therefore, she is included. Do you see the theological difficulty? So, in the whole Middle Ages, it was thrashed out, and it was not at all completely understood. And we have great theologians not willing to admit that she was in some way conceived without that bit needing redemption. It did not come as a result of a vision. It doesn't work like that. But there was an impetus, however, in the theological debate when already in 1830 the Blessed Virgin came to Rudebeck and gave this medal, which went round the world like wildfire, producing so many miracles that it took the name of miraculous, but with also an inscription on it in the vision given to St. Catherine Labouré, whose feast it was the other day, by the way. And it was, O Marie conçue sans péché. It's there, O Mary conceived without sin. So there was something coming directly from heaven there in an authentic vision, which went round quickly. Pius IX, by now Blessed Pius IX, being Pope, was worked upon by the Holy Spirit. There is a protection, a divine protection, and he, even before the First Vatican Council, which did define the possibility there clearly of making pronouncements of the sort in 1870, that the Holy Father could actually sum up the faith of the Church in a way which formalized what was already believed, but not actually formally defined, and would in so doing be protected by a special charism of infallibility. Before then, already in 1854, he did define this, that there was this breaking of the chain at the moment of conception of the Blessed Virgin. You probably don't realize actually the implications of that, but it's tremendous. It does mean that this is actually answering some of the great theologians of the Middle Ages and saying, yes, she was. But it was given gently and by a series of illuminations to those in authority and on the level of the church as a whole to understand serenely actually what was taking place. We have it in the prayer of this celebration right here, carefully worded, and more accurate now in the translation that we have since the retranslation of it into literal English. O God, who by the Immaculate Conception of the Blessed Virgin prepared a worthy dwelling for your Son, grant, we pray, that as you preserved her from every stain, by virtue of the death of your Son, which you foresaw. Now do you see how dense each phrase is? It's carefully chiseled, and each phrase counts. The whole theology is in that one prayer. But it took centuries to get to that concise vision of things, that God, being outside time, can apply posterior events in their effect. So she was redeemed. But there is more to it again. It is actually already a great thing to mend a person caught in a bad accident. But it's actually even more glorious to obvert that accident by a miraculous intervention. So, what in our case is a mending of the results, the facts, what we have done, in her case it's that other bit of obverting the actual falling into, and also the severing of the chain. There's a link not there. In her case, at the moment of conception, there was a break. She did not receive this curse, this original awfulness that came from the first disobedience. In Milton's Paradise Lost, it's very well portrayed. Nature felt the blow. That's at the moment of the apple being pulled, the actual disobedience in act. Milton puts it very well. There was a whole cosmic jarring note entering into the universe at that moment of man saying, as the demon had said before and got him to do the same, non serviam, I will not obey. Participating in the original illusion of Satan. You will be like gods. He too was keen on having his own realm, and of course having the answer from Michael, who is like God, his own name, Michael. But there we have that fundamental flaw, and we know how there was this casting out of original innocence. The bliss was lost, and consequences followed. The curse followed. There is good and evil henceforth, and man has to labour by the sweat of his brow to get some kind of existence from the henceforth almost hostile nature. It wasn't like that. And in the Fathers of the Desert, and also in saints close to us, some saints, you have Francis of Assisi, Anthony of Padua, and closer to us, people who somehow got into some kind of harmony with nature and had a huge influence over animals. Our Lady, therefore, on this night, chosen by the way as the beginning of the Year of Mercy, on this cosmic moment was truly, initially, embryonically crushing the head of this serpent, the figure that we've already seen in Genesis. And this serpent has a profound hatred for her, for he, Lucifer, had been the brightest of all things outside God, and knew it, hence that pride, which was his fall. And when presented with this creature, a creature now, who would be more glorious than he has a horrible and fundamental envy, hatred, and vendetta in her regard. And he will attack anything to do with the Blessed Virgin. He was successful in a large chunk of Europe in the Protestant revolt. She was one of the first to get it, with all kinds of added blasphemies, like that she had children and so on afterwards. It is interesting that when this was defined, another vision, approved also, came to one of our members who couldn't even read or write, little Bernadette of Lourdes. And we know that she didn't understand the words that she had to repeat to the parish priest. In Patois, it was the equivalent of, she said that she was the Immaculate Conception, and the parish priest, she said, what? And knew exactly the implications. She didn't invent that, but she used the title. It is also interesting that that dawn of the age of Mary continued, and there was a huge outburst in the middle of one of the most awful periods of history, the atrocities of the trenches, 1917. Again, a presence of heaven upon earth. We forget that that has actually increased considerably in the century that was to follow. Indeed, we have very curious interventions of that Mother of God, the Immaculate. I was just admiring again in my sacristy, my bedroom also is the same, this picture of what was able to be photographed in Cairo, in Egypt. You would have heard of these strange events there over the dome of an Orthodox church where there had been a place of prayer since Our Lady passed with St. Joseph and the Holy Child on the flight to Egypt. She appeared over there, and people thought that it was somebody going to commit suicide and jump, and they were crying out, "Lady, don't jump!" And then they realized bit by bit, with goose people, pimples coming down their spine, what on earth is going on here? This seems to be not at all human. It was a vision that all could see, including many Muslims. It was an area between different faiths. And therefore, by the thousand, Catholics, Orthodox and Muslims were honouring the Mother of God in their own mode. And this was able to be photographed, and you probably will have seen it around. It looks slightly blurred, but it's quite clear. It is the Virgin over the dome with a halo, and in the traditional posture of something like that actually, which somebody who comes here, Rosalind, painted. That's Our Lady protecting this little house. Well, it was interesting. These apparitions often precede atrocities in the place where they take place. There have been heads rolling in Egypt since then. Whatever happened or didn't happen in Medjugorje, the fact is that 10 years after this thing started there was an awful war in the area, and they were trying to explode the church, and each time it wouldn't explode. There was some screen across the radar or some bomb which would not detonate. It was preserved. Also, other places in Africa, she would come along, and about 10 years later, an almighty war would happen in the place. She is concerned. She is a mother, and she's closer to us than we realize. She's one of us. We tend to think of her almost in the godly sphere, but she's one of us and able to feel. The difference is that she participates in a supreme measure in the knowledge of her Son, and therefore when one sees different people together in ecstasy, one sees lips moving at different times because they have independent conversations, and she can also hear all our prayers right across the globe because of, by now, the glorious participation that she has in the knowledge of her Son. These are privileges which are natural consequences of this unique privilege. And on the way you have also the Assumption, which also was defined 1950 on the 1st of November by Pius XII, under that same inspiration of the Holy Spirit. And it was, again, a year of maximum grace. There was a jubilee in the air, as there is now starting at midnight tonight. Grace in the air. And we are called upon to have something of that fullness of grace, which is where I want to land, because it concerns us all this year. I want to mention how we need to watch over our soul. We are all fallen, but we have the divine means of getting out of it, and we have to use it, but we have to use it according to the plan of God and not our own, or a worse thing will happen. We will abuse grace, and that leads to hardening of the heart. It is not enough to receive sacraments. It is sufficient to receive prayer, but sacraments are not of our own making, and we have to obey the one who's given these divine encounters. We can't just use God as a toy. It doesn't quite work like that. He is the boss in this game. And I'm afraid if we look around, we are becoming the bosses in this game, if one looks carefully. Here we have the teaching of some of the great saints with regard to the importance of not receiving the Lord of glory with spots, they are maculae in Latin, on the soul. The soul has to be in its own measure without these spots. Therefore, according to the possibilities it has, according to the will, immaculate, because not wanting to come with wounding parts to the Lord. And so we have this constant among all those who have been in intimacy with the Lord and with heaven, that it is incompatible to go and not prepare. The Immaculate Conception, remember, is preparation. It's remotive preparation. So we are called upon to do the same, for we hold also the Lord in ourselves. And when Our Blessed Lady appeared in 1947 to Claude Newman, who was condemned to death in prison in America, a Negro, she did explain to him that when he was about to receive communion for the first time, he was to prepare for him as she prepared for her son, and adore him as she adored her son. That same presence was going to be his. It is a real presence, and therefore we are actually hosts in the sense of guardians of the Lord until the species disappear. So we are genuine tabernacles, and this element of preparation has also the corollary that if it's taken seriously, the adoration and absorption and attention also is looked after. Because if it's not, again, it can lead to hardening of the heart, because we're not honouring our king and our guest. We are actually manipulating him and being rude to him. When the King of Glory comes, we give him our full attention as long as he's there. In our abbey in Italy, the prior would not allow us to do anything at all until the presence had gone. Therefore, about 10 minutes, quarter of an hour, he would not allow a single word, and everything had to be left exactly as it was on the altar and on the credence table. All we were allowed to do was to take off our chasuble and the stole and the owl, but we had to be straight back in choir until the presence had disappeared, warning us that otherwise grace was going to be abused. So, we have all the saints of history having one thing in common. It's the fact that they could not receive the Lord without serenity of soul. It goes hand in hand with a relationship. As in human bonding, one cannot have a bit of the other person and still be in genuine intimacy. One cannot use a person. There is a difference. The body has its language, but it is the expression of the soul. So too, with our encounters with the Lord, the body has its language, but the soul is what engages, and it has to engage. And if it is disengaged and shoved away, hurt, wounded, forgotten, and washed its hands off, it cannot then, in peace and intimacy, embrace until that's been handled. And that is what is happening. So we must see what is going on. The devil hates also the Blessed Sacrament with a supreme hate. He knows full well which hosts are consecrated and which aren't, and he just loves to see the Lord badly used. Hosts on the ground, so that they can be trampled upon. They're always disappearing from our tabernacles and our assemblies because they're easy to get now. They have to be every month for satanic celebrations. But also from the assemblies themselves. He makes sure that as many as possible go away without an encounter, and as many as possible with a sacrilegious encounter. Now, do you think Our Lady doesn't see that? And when, therefore, she engages with earth again, not only with apparitions, but also with interventions, we have one just behind there, actually, that is framed, but it happened there at Grange Com. We have the weeping statue there, and it is actually a statue of Medjugorje, but it's there, and the bloodshot eyes can be seen, and then in that second picture there, you see also the host appearing over the Immaculate Heart, saying why she is weeping blood. That happened to Ellen in 1994, 95, and it's something which is for us. At the time, actually, the Kinderkrop was an awful mess. Now, I would just want to leave you with this, but I would want to give you with one hint. It's the link between intimacy, which we find in the heart of our Blessed Lady, the Immaculate Heart, and one specific issue, which is linked also with the problem that we have in many of our assemblies and why we carry so little fruit away. It's interiority. Interiority. We are celebrating with the heart, and all the rest is an expression of it. We can't celebrate just with the body, otherwise it's an empty shell. Just listen to this quote with which I will conclude. Do you think God is satisfied with merely external things as we are? Try to understand that true holiness is not so much on the outside, rather it is inside, deep inside. This is where God has placed it, and that is where He wants us to seek it. For only there can it be found, and only by what is there inside can holiness be judged. So you see how difficult it is to recognize holiness. It is hidden away in the innermost part of the heart and soul. And who can know what is in there except God and the person's own understanding, which sees what God approves and reproves. No one else can enter there. God has decreed in His infinite and uncreated wisdom that no one can penetrate those innermost parts except God and the soul itself, and that in there, without the sound of any words, those two should be able to speak secretly and understand each other. That's Francesca Gavinca del Valle. The devil hates, therefore, innocence in the Blessed Virgin, but also in the innocent of this world, our children. They are the angels of the earth. And anyone who scandalizes, that is caused to stumble, a child, will probably find heaven very difficult to penetrate. We must be very careful when we have one of these angels of the earth before us. As it happens, I had two little angels, travelling girls today, and they wanted to play with the many teddy bears and things I have, so they wanted also to have the camera, so we talked with the teddy bears in front of the camera. But I just thought how a child is straight from heaven, and how also they have gems in the things they say when they come from heaven. I'll just give you with one. She's my best friend. That is two sisters, and they actually love each other so much that they hug and sit on each other like two teddy bears. And I thought, uncontaminated, as nature was before we lost Eden.